everybody, welcome back to another perfectly pieced video. This is our July block and border tutorial and mystery quilt video. We're going to stitch out one block with quilting and some borders today. If you're new to Perfectly Pieced and this is your first time watching one of my perfectly pieced videos, please check out the links below. You can watch all the videos since the beginning of the year. We're stitching out one block with borders per month and putting together a quilt. There's a free download that'll be linked below for you. It has all the information, a couple of different layouts, the fabric requirements, measurements, everything you're going to need to make your own perfectly pieced mystery quilt. The fabrics I'm using for the year are Lori Holt's Gentler Times, and my borders are done in Kona Bone Solid. My batting is Missouri Star Quilt Company 80/20 batting, and everything gets a spray with faultless heavy finish spray starch, no fusible on the back. Let's talk about what you get with your July Perfectly Pieced subscription. This month is the spool block. Today we're going to make one block and we're going to use the custom block by block quilting. I am going to have another Perfectly Pieced video this month and we're going to make a special project. Not quite like the featured project, it's going to be a little bit different and we'll utilize this all over quilting. I think this is so pretty. I want to make something and use the spools and all over quilting. In addition to your digital files, you get a number of instructions and printouts. This is the digital contents. It shows you the block, the custom block by block quilting, all over quilting, and the borders that you get for the month. There's a featured project here on the bottom, and on the second page there are other layouts that you could use to make some other projects. 4-inch, 6-inch, and 8-inch. You also get a printout detailing your borders. This month is the loopy border. We'll be stitching out some 2-inch borders today to go along our 8-inch block. If you're making the smaller ladder quilt version or just a smaller version, you might be stitching out the 1-inch borders. There's two sets of instructions for making your spool block. One is the single block with quilting and one is the single block with no quilting. I've printed off the single block with quilting. That's what we're going to work on today. On the bottom, you can also see samples of some of the evergreen projects that are included with your Perfectly Pieced subscription. I went with greens for this month's spool block. I'll be making the 8-inch block today. I have to use my 9 by 14-inch hoop. It's my largest hoop. I'm going to load some light mesh cutaway stabilizer. We're going to head over to the machine and get started. I'm on a baby lock already. My files are on USB. I'm going to be pulling up the 8-inch block with quilting today. You get blocks sized 2, 4, 6, and 8. Each one has two versions with and without quilting. I want the 8-inch with the quilting. Go ahead and bring that up. I'm going to hit set and embroidery. I'm ready to get started. This is the type of needle I have on my machine right now. A regular needle will work just fine for this. I happen to have this on my machine for my last project. These are great for projects with a lot of overlapping applique and lots of stitching. For my thread, I picked this kind of medium forest green looking thread. This is a Floriani thread. I'm going to put that on my machine. I'm going to use it throughout the entire project today. I've got my green thread on my machine, light mesh cutaway. We're going to start with our batting placement line. Once that's stitched out, you want to place your batting. Make sure to cover the placement line. I've got a piece of tape ready at the top. It's my kimberbell paper tape. Tape that down and we're going to stitch the batting tack down line. Once your batting is tacked down, go ahead and trim away everything outside of the tack down line, and if you taped it in place, remove your tape. I've got that trimmed. I'm using my double curved applique scissors today. I'll make sure those are linked for you below. The next thing we're going to do is stitch out our piecing template. That's going to stitch right over our batting. Our piecing template has stitched out. We're going to start with section 1 right here. Fabric 1, you want to make sure to completely cover that section with your fabric. Check and make sure you're overlapping on the ends. This line right here, the line right here. It pretty much sticks to the batting, but I always add a piece of tape just in case. And it's interesting looking at my fabric. I didn't think about this when I cut it. I could have cut it like this. You see the lines? Would have looked a little more like thread, but I'm not going to recut a new piece. We'll go ahead and lay that down, tape it into place, and we're going to stitch out our first trimming and placement line. Our trimming and placement line has stitched out. We're going to trim away this piece right here. I've got that trimmed. You want to grab your piece 2 fabric. That's another fabric that has lines that I probably could have cut going that direction, but that's okay. We're going to center it along this line here. So my lines are actually going to end up being a little crooked. And this one goes right side down. Center it along that trimming and placement line. Got my tape right there. I'm just going to add it up top to hold it. We'll put it back on our machine and we're going to stitch the seam. The seam has stitched. I'm going to take off the tape. I'm going to flip this, and I'm going to use my little clover seam roller to press it. You can take this over to your iron if you want, and if you starched it, actually finger press is probably pretty good. That's one of the birds. I'll put their picture on the screen for you. We've got a parrot and a canary. The canary has been very quiet lately. I've got that pressed nice and flat. I don't feel like I need a piece of tape. We're going to stitch out the next trimming and placement line. You want to trim away this part right here. We've got fabric 3 next, another fabric with lines. Let's place this right side down. We're going to center it along that trimming and placement line we just stitched. I will add a piece of tape to this because it's fabric on fabric. I don't want it to slide. When it's fabric on batting, it sticks really well. We're going to go ahead, put this back on our machine and stitch the seam. Do the same thing. If you've used tape, take off the tape. Flip and press, and then we're going to stitch out our next trimming and placement line. It's going to go, I think, right about there. We want to trim away the extra here, and I even have just a little bit up here. We're ready for piece 4. Piece 4 is your background fabric. If you're using a light colored fabric, check your batting, make sure there's no fuzzies or hairs or anything on there. This is my background fabric. It's kind of this cream with, I'm not quite sure what those are, little print on it. We're going to place it right side down, center along that trimming and placement line. I'm going to grab a piece of tape and then we'll stitch the seam. That is all stitched out. Do the same thing, take off the tape, flip it, press it, use your little seam roller or take it to your iron, and then we're going to stitch out the next trimming and placement line up here. We're going to do the same thing we just did right here, because piece 5 is the same as piece 4. It's the other side of your block. Trim away the extra. I'm going to grab my piece 5, right side down, center it along the trimming and placement line, grab a piece of tape. We'll go ahead and stitch the seam. Remove the tape, flip and press. Going to go to 6 and 7 are our spool caps, so the edges of our spool. We'll go ahead and stitch out the trimming and placement line for piece 6. Trim that away, and you've got a little bit here and a little bit here. Then we'll place our piece 6 right side down, centered along that trimming and placement line, and stitch the seam. I'm going to leave that just like that for the moment. We're going to go ahead and stitch out the next trimming and placement line, trim away the extra, place piece 7 right side down, centered along the trimming and placement line, and stitch the seam. Now I need to flip and press both of these. Since I didn't do this one earlier, I want to flip them, press them. I'm going to go ahead and get my little seam roller and run over them with my seam roller, and then we're going to stitch our trimming and placement line for piece 8. Once that line has stitched out, we want to go ahead and trim away just like before. We're going to trim this away, and then we're going to get our piece 8 and lay it right side down along the trimming and placement line and stitch the seam. I'm going to leave this for now. We're going to stitch our trimming and placement line, trim away the extra, and place piece 9 right side down, centered along the trimming and placement line, and stitch that seam. I'm going to take the tape off and walk this over to my ironing board. Give it a good press. If you have any tape at all left on this, take it off before you take it to your iron. Tape will stick to your iron, it'll burn, it'll smell, it's kind of gross. It's paper tape, it's paper. I want to give this a good press. The next thing we're going to stitch out is the trimming line. It's going to go all the way around the outside of our block, so I want to make sure all of these pieces are nice and flat. I've got that nice and flat. Let's go ahead and stitch out our trimming line. The next thing we're going to do is stitch out the block quilting. I want to show this to you on the machine. they've divided this into 2 separate steps, which is really nice. The first step is the quilting that goes over the spool. So if you're making different colors of spools and you want to match your thread to your spool fabric, like for mine I'm making the green, I could use green, and if I was making a whole quilt and going block by block, I could switch after this to a different color and do the background quilting. For me, for this project, I'm going to do both steps in the same color, so you'll see them run together on the video. But when you're making your own, you have the option here doing a color for your threads and a separate color for the little background bits. I'm going to stitch out both of those sections in green, so you'll see it stitch the thread part first, and then I'll go ahead and start it and stitch out the background. This is all stitched out. It looks so great. I'm going to take this off my machine. We're going to start on our borders, and then we'll trim everything at the end. We're going to stitch out the borders. I already went through the files and looked at the length of these. The 2x7 is 7 inches long. The 2x10 is 9.33 inches long. The 12-inch long border is 11.67 inches long. And the 14-inch border is actually 14 inches. If this is your first video, the reason these aren't exactly matching for some of these, it has to do with the way the patterns are designed and the repeat. I'm bordering an 8-inch block, so I need 2 on the sides that are at least 8 inches long. That's going to be the 2x10. And the top and the bottom, 12 inches. I'm actually going to go with this 2x12 for that. I'm going to stitch out 2 of these 2x10 borders on camera, and I'll stitch the longer ones off camera, then we'll put together our block. If you want to see a more detailed discussion about the border lengths, go to the first video in the series where we stitch out the January block, and I talk a little bit more about that. Let's go ahead and load the 2x10 border, and I'm going to stitch out 2 of those. They're going to go on the sides of my 8-inch block. I'm going to get the 2x10. I'm going to hit set, edit. I'm going to move it over to the left a little bit. I'm going to duplicate it. And I also go through this slower in previous videos. I'm using the border duplicate key. We're going to put 1 on the right. The most I can fit is 3, so I do 2 and 2. I'm going to give myself a little bit of space. Makes it easier to trim everything. Move this over, I'm going to hit OK, and then I save it to my machine just in case something happens during the stitch out, and I delete it afterwards. I have the same green thread on my machine. For the borders, I can use my 8x12 hoop. The first thing we stitch out is the batting placement, and we're going to be stitching single borders. If you're doing a kimberbell project where you need to join the borders, I'll put a video link below for you, and you can watch that process. Let's go ahead and stitch out the placement line. The placement lines are all stitched out. We want to cover that with our batting. Since we've been doing this since the beginning of the year, I've got lots of batting strips. These are 3 inches wide. I did cut some new ones to use once I've run out of these, and I only cut them about 2.5 inches wide. 3 inches wide is definitely wider than you need. We're going to go ahead and stitch the batting tack down line. Once the tack down has stitched out, remove any tape if you've used tape, and we're going to trim away everything that's outside of the tack down lines. I always save these little pieces. That's how I end up with scrap pieces, and I get to use them for another project. These are trimmed. I'm going to stitch out the fabric placement line. Placement line has stitched out. We want to go ahead and cover the placement line with our border fabric. I'm going to slide that over, make sure I get the placement line covered, and tape them down, and then we'll stitch the tack down. The fabric's tacked down. We're ready to stitch out our quilting. These are all done. I'm going to go ahead and stitch my 2 borders for the top and the bottom. I'll do that off camera, and we'll put our block together. We need to trim everything. I have my 8.5-inch square orange pop ruler. I've shown how to use this before with the rotating cutting mat. I'm going to use that to trim my block. I've got that all lined up. My little clip tin paperweight there. All the way over to the side. Right-handed this side, left-handed will be this side. Down in the notch, all the way over. A little bit of fabric fold there. And then turn and go all the way around. Trim all of your sides. These are 2-inch finished borders, so I have to trim these 2.5 inches wide. I'll show this again. Here's a 2.5-inch wide ruler. This is 2 1/4. Flip it to the back. The fabric placement line, which we cannot see from the front, right here, the outside line, that's going to be 2 1/2 inches. If you're doing the 1 1/2 inch, which is 1 inch finish, that'll be 1 1/2 inches. So these are easier to trim from the back. I'll just go ahead and trim one. We've done so many of these since the beginning of the year with this project. Again, if this is your first time watching one of these and you want to jump into the mystery quilt project, I'll have a link below for the playlist. You can watch all of the videos. I go through everything slower at the beginning. I'm going to go ahead and trim all my borders, and then we'll talk about attaching them to our block. We're ready to attach our borders. The shorter borders are going to be your side borders. 2 things to think about with this block. Do you want it like this? This, I guess like that is the same as like that. You have to think about which direction you want your spool when it's in your quilt, because the side borders are the short borders. I'm going to set it like this. This is the top, these are the sides. It's a directional border. I want the little top pointing out. You can point it in if you like. I like the way it looks pointing out. I'm going to do my best to line up the center with the center of my block. I'm going to do that by folding. Let's match up the threads here. We'll go ahead and finger press the center. And we'll do the same on this side. Match up where the quilting ends. Line that up. Finger press. And then I'm going to take my block and fold that in half. Finger press right here on the end and right there on the end. Now I can see where everything needs to go. Right about there and right about there. I'm going to add some clips so it doesn't shift when I take it over to my sewing machine. Sew with a 1/4 inch seam. I'll press it out towards the border. I'll come back and we'll do the top and bottom. Here's the back. I have everything pressed out toward the borders. Here's the front. I have to trim off the extra, and then we can lay down the top and bottom borders and look at the design and figure out how to center that. You can see I lost a little bit of the quilting on the tops and bottoms. It's fine. Let's look at the longer border. This is the center, this one right here. So this one's kind of easy to center. We'll fold our block. Remember, I stitched out the border that was slightly shorter than what I needed because I know I have a seam allowance. I'm going to face this towards me so I get it right. The middle is right there. So you'll see there's kind of empty space here and here. That'll be fine when it gets put in the quilt. That's going to get caught in the seam allowance, and this border, like right here, is probably going to be just about perfect. I'm going to go ahead and stitch both of these on. I'll press it out and trim. We'll get a look at the finished block and we'll talk about the project. Here's the finished block. It looks great. A whole quilt like this with the spool, and even if you put borders around them and just did spools and did all different colors, that would look really neat. There are additional project ideas that come with your perfectly pieced subscription, and then they always feature one here on the front. I'm going to do a second video. We're going to stitch out a different block size without quilting and make a fun project. Watch for that over the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much for stitching out the July perfectly pieced spool block with me for our 2026 mystery quilt. Please be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends. There's also a link below to my Facebook group. Feel free to join. You have to answer one security question that helps keep out the bots and the spammers. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them for me below the video. And if you've decided to sign up for Perfectly Pieced after watching one of my videos, I ask that you please consider using my link below. I do get a small commission, but more importantly, it lets Kimberbell know people are watching and enjoying my content. Thanks for making the spool block with me today. I'll see you next time.